Let's all smile, everybody.
Oh, Jesus.
Welcome, everybody.
Okay, let's get started. More and more people are coming into the conversation. And so we'll do our welcomes. Hello and welcome. I am Hafiz Rashid, the Senior Advisor, Communications and Outreach at the King Budwein Foundation, United States. It's great to be here, and thanks for taking the time today to attend the first webinar in the African Resource Mobilization webinar series. There are several names that I'm familiar with on the attendee list, but for those who aren't familiar with KBF US, please allow me a brief word. The King Budwein Foundation United States facilitates thoughtful, effective giving to Europe and Africa. We enable US donors to support their favorite causes overseas. We also provide European and African nonprofits with cost-effective solutions to raise funds in the United States through a tool we call an American Friends Fund. We have over 450 American Friends Funds, including the University of Nairobi, the Harare International Festival of Arts, and the Magda Yaqub Heart Foundation, among others. These funds save nonprofits the trouble and expense of setting up their own U.S. public charity. KBF US handles all back office administration, including tax receipts and donor support. Whether you have donors in the US, Canada, or Europe, KBF US can help facilitate their donations to your nonprofit in Africa. These funds save African nonprofits the trouble and expense of setting up their own US public charities. So if you have donors in the US, feel free to reach out to me and we'll be happy to assist. My contact email will be made available following the webinar. There are a few additional points I'd like to make. All participants who have entered this webinar are in listen-only mode. This session is being recorded, and our moderator, Liz Ngonzi, will address questions at specific points throughout the discussion, but I encourage use of the Q&A feature to submit your questions throughout.
Awesome. Thank you so very much, Hafiza. I truly enjoyed collaborating with you and the rest of the King Budwein Foundation US team to develop this series over the last few months. Thank you so very much for the opportunity to do so. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for taking the time to learn with us. Please feel free to share your questions in the Q&A. For those of you who I'm yet to meet, I am the founder and CEO of the International Social Impact Institute, which I founded last year, recognizing that the unprecedented challenges facing the social impact sector highlighted the need for focused, creative, and well-networked change makers and social impact-driven leaders to help guide the sector forward. Through initiatives with the King Budwein Foundation US, Nelson Mandela University in South Africa, and the Arcus Foundation and Hunter College in the city of New York, the Institute aims to amplify the voices of social impact leaders from historically marginalized communities in the US and around the world, facilitate interactions among them, and assist in the training of more of them. With that said, the African Resource Mobilization webinar series is dear to me, because it enables us to bring together many stakeholders as well as our incredible partners, including Candid, Civicus Global Alliance, Equity Group Holdings, the Issroff Family Foundation, the Kenya Association of Fundraising Professionals, the Nigeria Network of NGOs, and the Tri-State Area Africa Funders Network. I encourage you to learn about them as they support the social impact sector in many of the countries in which your organizations operate, offering research, educational content, networking opportunities, and of course, funding. In speaking with our Africa-based partners, including the Kenya Association of Fundraising Professionals and the Nigerian Network of NGOs, we learned that the challenges that organizations face when seeking to engage US-based foundations and philanthropists include simple geographic distance, which is exacerbated by the current travel restrictions due to COVID, and the fact that only 10% of the 140,000 foundations in the US have websites. Those factors, along with the cost of finding useful information, rob many organizations of the opportunity to access the funding and capacity building resources offered by foundations. We also discovered that many organizations have only a limited understanding about the importance of aligning their own interests with those of their prospective funders, which is key to developing an effective case for support. Against that backdrop, today's webinar is designed to shed light on the key elements necessary to attract, engage, and develop long-term relationships with U.S. foundations and philanthropists. Okay, so I'm going to now introduce these wonderful women. As we approach International Women's Day next week, I'm especially delighted to introduce two women as distinguished panelists. First is my dear friend, Lisa Issroff, who is the co-founder and executive director of the Isroff Family Foundation based in New York. She also heads the Tri-State Area Africa Funders Network, an informal group of like-minded funders, including individuals, foundations, corporations, and consultants based in the Tri-State New York area who fund throughout Africa. Though based in the United States, Lisa originally hails from South Africa and has a grasp of the continent's challenges and of potential solutions. I had the pleasure of meeting our second panelist, Tatu Gatere, through this series development process. She is the co-founder and CEO of Buildher, and our discussions have left me profoundly impressed by her mission to equip women in Kenya with accredited construction skills. Yes, I said that, accredited construction skills, leading to greater financial prosperity while changing attitudes and promoting gender equality within the construction industry. Quite a tall order. I'd now like to ask our panelists to tell you a bit about themselves before we go into the panel discussion. Lisa, please share with us a bit about IFF and how it partners with and supports early stage leaders of community-based organizations to improve outcomes for children, youth, and their communities.
Liz, thank you very much. And before I jump in, I would just like to thank all of our organizers for having me here. I certainly feel honored and just want to note, because it speaks to some of, I think, the discussion we will have today. Liz, you didn't randomly find me on LinkedIn and ask me to join this panel.
No.
As you referenced, we became good friends, and I recall how we first met. In addition to your many, many roles that you perform, one of them that people may not know about is that you are a professor. And Liz was giving a course in funding and fundraising in Africa, and I attended the course and was incredibly inspired by her. And this was, gosh, I'm not going to age myself, but maybe about 10 years ago. And during the last 10 years, we have developed a relationship. We've got to know each other as people, got to respect each other as colleagues, respect each other's work, learn about each other's work, and thus have had the opportunity on a number of occasions over the last few years to partner together. And I think that that short story exemplifies the way that we at Isroff Family Foundation do our work. Our work is based very much in our values and is very relational. We do partner, as you mentioned, with early stage organizations. So I want to be explicit about that. We are a funder of early stage organizations and have some programming, some what we used to call capacity building, I guess technical assistance programming for some of those early stage community-based organizations. And the second thing I think that is primary for us in the work that we do is collaboration. And in that vein, we like to help create networks. You referenced the Tri-State Area Africa Funders Network. We were very fortunate to have been one of the co-founders of that network about 5 years ago.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lisa. Wow, that was really a great introduction. I appreciate it. And so Tatu, we're going to hear from you right now. Please tell us about your fascinating journey from, being an architect to an award-winning social entrepreneur.
Thank you so much. And first, I'd like to say I appreciate participating in the webinar today. And thank you to you and the crew behind the scenes for making this happen. My journey is a very circuitous route, so I won't go too much into it. Basically, I studied architecture abroad in the United States. I'm Kenyan, but also American. And throughout that journey, I was puzzled by how to translate my Western education to my context. And so one of the things that was key for me during my education and after I got some work experience was coming back home and practicing back home in Kenya. And through that process, community work really stood out to me because there was such a big gap in how the lower income community was living and spaces being designed for them and access being given to the city. I had so many questions with that respect. In about 2015, I left commercial practice and first went to Kibera to work with an organization there, building public spaces, working with community. And that phase of my journey was really learning what it takes to design and consider communities. And I quickly learned that I had to design with rather than design for. And through that exercise, I got to train youth and got to train women, which taught me a lot about the gap in our training to employment, accessibility to low-income communities. How do we train people in construction? How do they connect to jobs? And through that process, I co-founded Buildher to try and create solutions to that question.
Fantastic. I love circuitous routes. I think that, rarely do people go from, one place to the next and have a consistent sort of background. Because Lisa, you started off as a teacher, right? But what you do is you do teach. So it actually makes a lot of sense that you're kind of going there. And it looks like a lot of folks are joining us, which is exciting. Thank you to everyone who is with us. Let's just go ahead and start with the question. So given the various challenges I identified earlier that preclude many organizations on the African continent from accessing US funders, I'd like to know your thoughts about how those connections can be made. I'd also like to understand how one leverages relationships in order to do so. Lisa, you really already alluded to it a bit, but I'd like to go a little bit deeper. And I think a great place to start might be for the two of you to share about how you first met, and then perhaps provide us with some practical strategies and tips for those looking to forge similar relationships in their own context. So Tatu, would you like to begin first?
Sure. Meeting Lisa was actually very relevant to this discussion. Lisa was an introduction made by one of our funders who has become a key advocate of our work. And was looking to broaden our network and connect us to a funding network of diverse people who could offer a different level of support. And with Lisa, the conversation first came in when we were, building our board and considering our systems. And our funder was able to connect us, and from there, the relationship continued to develop until the Isroff Foundation, we came on board and developed a partnership with them.
Fantastic. And Lisa, can you share a little bit about the relationship as well? And also, so what you've seen in terms of effective sort of ways that organizations have approached IFF as well as, those in your network. So through their networks.
Great. Thank you for that, Ulas. And Tatu referenced a friend that we have in common, somebody who was an early stage supporter of Buildher. And this friend, that's one of the primary ways that we learn about new organizations, is through people currently in our network. And some of those people are funders. Some of those people are current organizations which we support, and then various other connections. And I think that's really important going forward, because this friend who introduced us is someone I trust and respect in the field. And I know that when she makes an introduction to an organization for me, it is certainly an organization worth paying attention to. And so she introduced us, and I was actually on my way to Nairobi and reached out to Tatu and her co-founder James to request a meeting. And I did threaten to tell a story about James, which I'll quickly tell. I'm not sure that he knows the story, or that I should be sharing to such a wide audience. But James very kindly offered to pick me up at the hotel I was staying at in Nairobi and drive me to the Buildher site for a site visit. And I was waiting outside on the sidewalk on the pavement outside the hotel. And all of a sudden, there was this car that came racing down the road and sort of made a big U-turn in front of the hotel, causing all the traffic. Everybody was hooting and honking and etc. And then the guy stopped just in front of where I was standing and rolled down his window, and he said to me, "Are you Lisa?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "Well, I'm James. I'm here to meet you. I'm from Buildher." And I remember thinking to myself, oh my goodness, am I putting my life in danger getting into this person's car? I really want to go visit the site and I really want to meet this organization. But quite frankly, I was a little bit intimidated by his driving style. Anyway, I did get in the car and very grateful for that. I arrived at the Buildher site in Nairobi and just was extraordinarily impressed by everything I saw. At the time, they did not have their warehouse set up. So it was an exciting day for the team because their equipment to set up their building warehouse was just arriving. So I could feel this excitement in the air. I did have the opportunity to sit in on a class where an instructor was instructing the woman, as they do at Buildher, around some of the technical skills that they then practice in the workshop. And I do think it's a pity in COVID days that I know site visits are significantly less frequent and reduced. Yeah. But for me, a person who is very relationship based, it was an important part of the introduction to many of the organizations that we now have relationships with.
Wow, that's great. So James is not going to be very happy about being the story told about him, but I think that's okay. That's probably we authorize it. But you know, you have to just kind of flow with it.
It's good fun.
Yeah. So there are quite a number of people joining us, and they're sending their greetings to the two of you. And if anyone has questions they want to ask, please go ahead. I'm loving hearing from you, from whether it's from Cape Town, from Nairobi, from Lagos, and of course Uganda, where I'm from. It's really wonderful. So go ahead and share your questions, and I'm going to continue with the questions we prepared, but I'd love to hear from you and be able to share yours. All right, so let's now talk a little bit about let's understand like how an organization can effectively communicate how its mission aligns with that of the prospective partner. And I think that's really important. I think that in having this discussion with someone from KFP, we're talking about the fact that, a lot of times we assume, well, my organization is great. We're working with the orphans. We're making all this, huge impact. So of course people should want to fund it. But that's sort of it's really not a realistic view to way of approaching funders or understanding what it is that they're looking for and what's the best way to make the case for support. So Lisa, can you start first from your perspective as a funder? And then Tatu, I'd love to hear from you in terms of what are some of the things that you do specifically to really engage and make the case for support in an effective way.
Great, thank you, Liz. So a couple of points. Firstly, the leaders of early stage organizations that I've met in the old days, we used to often meet in my office in New York or on site visits when I was traveling to East Africa. And leaders are some of the most intelligent, passionate, committed people that I've come across. I have yet to meet the leader in my over 10 years of doing this work who says to me, Lisa, I started this organization or I founded this organization because I love fundraising and I love budgets and I love spreadsheets and I love managing teams. If there are any of you out there, and that is the reason why you started this organization, I would like to meet you because I have yet to meet that person. People who start organizations or found organizations, in my experience, are either inspired to do this work because they feel a calling or a purpose, either to solve a challenge that they identify, or they see an opportunity or a gap which they believe they can fill. Very few organization leaders have, as I said, either a passion for some of these other things or start off with experience or expertise in them. But quite frankly,
Lisa, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Can you move a little closer to your mic? They're having a little trouble hearing you, apparently.
Sorry.
No problem. Thank you.
Thanks for pointing that out, Liz.
Sorry.
Okay. I usually get accused of screaming in
Scream away.
So I do think that in my experience, when I ask early stage leaders of organizations how much time they spend talking to people like me, trying to fundraise, trying to sell their idea or their vision, it ends up it's at least a majority of their time. And so I would say that it is probably worth spending time figuring out how to get good at this, how to learn the strategies, how to be efficient, and how to be effective. This work is really hard, and most of the leaders that I know are significantly overworked. And so there are strategies. I think from my personal experience, it's about understanding who funders are that will be a good fit for your organization.
Yeah.
You can do that work for funders. If you can understand who the funders are in your ecosystem or in your issue area or in your geographic area with whom you have a good fit, you have a much better chance of making a case to those funders about why they should care about your mission or your work. And I also believe that I always say, like with my group of friends, I am who I am, but I speak to perhaps my mom and my daughter and some of my friends in a different tone. And so when one is approaching funders and understanding relationships, it's important to know what they care about, what vocabulary they use to talk about their work. Are they an early stage funder, or perhaps you're a later stage organization at a growth or an inflection point? Who is a subgroup of funders in that thing? So I think maybe in the olden days there was this approach where you just sort of cast your net wide. I think increasingly, as people are becoming a little bit more specific instead of generalists, it's to one's advantage to understand the funder.
Right, absolutely. I agree with you on that. Tatu, do you want to share?
Well, I just wanted to agree with Lisa. I think when I think of my growth in fundraising, one of the critical things for me was starting to see funders as people, and as opposed to this power dynamic of the haves and have-nots, and actually get curious about what funders are focused on, how their strategies have changed over time, their history of funding, who have they funded, and how has that changed. And I think doing that background research has really shifted results for Buildher. And also getting curious about the particular people I'm meeting from funding organizations or foundations, and really understanding the particular people and what background they come with, because it allows me to speak to their interests, to speak to their expertise, and having an attitude of there's much more than money that you can come out with from a conversation. So when I meet someone, I'm also interested in what their background would be, in addition to what the foundation's background is, to see how we can find alignment on a personal and organizational level. And that helps open up networks to you as well. So for me, I'd say that shift is what really has helped build up.
Okay, Phil, that's fantastic. So a couple things. One, Lisa, can you please define early stage organizations for those who aren't familiar with that term?
Yeah, super, thank you. So I think our assumption, Liz, is that the organizations that we meet and that we're interested in partnering with are organizations that have an idea, but the idea is still evolving. So part of our theory of change is we invest in a leader with the understanding that, quite frankly, just like us in the earlier stages of our foundation, we didn't come to this work with this sort of cast in cement idea of how to do it. We came to this work with an understanding that we were going to learn and we were going to evolve, and our strategy was going to change over time as we understood where the niche was, where we could have impact. And so when I speak about early stage, it's people who leaders who have a vision, as I said, either a solution to a challenge or an opportunity that they see that they believe that they can invest in. But their strategy is not fixed, and it's not. I would be very surprised if a leader was doing the same thing 10 years after they started than when they were doing it at the beginning. That would make me a little suspicious, and I would wonder, where is the learning and where is the evolution? And particularly in today's world, if there were not early stage leaders for whom COVID disrupted or their plan,
Right.
or their strategy. And I do think that there's something about the stage of organizations where we work, where there's something about being nimble and being flexible and being willing to evolve and learn. And that certainly is the case with Buildher. Every time we talk to Tatu, they thinking about piloting something, a new part of the program, or evolving a strategy. The needs in the community in which they work are changing rapidly over the last year or so.
So actually, this brings up a really good point, and we covered it when we were preparing for this, and I want to bring it out. Is this notion that as an organization you have to be perfect, right? We never want to let the funder know, like, if there've been any mistakes or they were trying to do something different. Like, because when you innovate, obviously you have to iterate, and sometimes funders aren't as forgiving. And how can we really sort of, how can we address that such that we create an environment which an organization can feel comfortable being transparent around that sort of, and I don't want to use the word failure, but it's just, it's you're learning from trying something and it doesn't always work. And how it is that we can enable organizations to be more nimble, because, let's say if I received funding 3 years ago for a specific thing and then COVID hits, well, we need to address what's going on in the market. So how do we then communicate that to our funders and say, look, we kind of need to pivot here? And I'm going to give it to either one of you to respond to.
Tatu, go ahead, and then I'll jump.
Okay, I can start. So one of the things that we did, especially over COVID, was to communicate whenever shifts and changes were happening. And also understanding our funder relationships. There's some relationships that are really great at helping you figure it out when you start to see the challenge coming and you're kind of thinking around it. There's some funders you can talk to at that level of discovery, and also ask them who in their networks would be great for you to speak to around this. So which funder would be interested in exploring this? Because in my view, a funder is always interested in where you're succeeding, but you want a funder who's also interested in where you're failing and what's challenging you, because that mix then allows you to be honest about the journey. There are other relationships that I found are really crucial, and it's just more effective to come into that conversation when you've developed an understanding of the challenge and a proposal of how you'd like to address it, and then communicate what shift you're suggesting to make along the way. And I find by connecting with funders as you're figuring it out and as you're shifting, instead of communicating when the failure has happened, allows your funder to support you. They have a large network and they can help understand, we already are seeing this happening, and this is what people are testing and what's working. And that might inform your direction in the challenge you're facing. And one other thing I would add is constant communication, and not bombarding anyone with information. But if I reached out to say, hey, this is a challenge, can we have a chat? Then 2 months, 1 month later, I'll say, thank you for taking the time to speak with me. This is where we are now. In a very short email just to update, so that when I'm sharing a report, it makes sense where we are. And during that whole process, a funder can still support my journey and decision-making and pivoting throughout that process.
Okay, that's perfect. Okay, Lisa?
Yeah, Tatu, I think that my takeaway from what you just said is communication is the key, and it's certainly the key for me too. I also believe that if some of the challenges we're facing were easy to solve, people would have solved them.
Right.
We wouldn't be here. This field wouldn't be here. We wouldn't need to have these conversations. These are hard challenges. And because they're hard challenges, we have to keep trying different things. And some of them will succeed. I mean, in the private sector, we're very happy to have lots of businesses go out of business until the one or the two succeed. I do think organizations, particularly at the early stage, are going to try things, and some of them hopefully will work and many of them will not. We believe in funding that, I think, with a couple of premises. One is the premise that Tatu mentioned, that there's communication. The second is that the failure or mistake is the result of deliberate, intentional thinking.
Right.
One day you just decided to wake up and do this, and there's no measurement around it, and there's no intentionality or design. I think other things for us is not making the same mistake 2 or 3 times. So learning from it and evolving and incorporating those learnings into the work. And then the third thing that I say, and this relates a little bit to our ideas around network and collaboration, I would hope that leaders are not making the same mistakes as all of their neighbors. And if there are opportunities or forums, and we certainly at Isroff Family Foundation try to intentionally plan and build these collaborations and these networks, learn from your neighbor's mistakes, learn from the organization down the road. I always say that way you can make different kind of mistakes that they can learn from you. And the final point, Liz, funders are not perfect either. We also make mistakes, even in our relationship with Tatu. There's sometimes I misspeak or missay or and I need to own it. And yeah, that's the way we all learn and evolve.
But I think what's so important here, everything you said is really important, but I think really what I want people to get out of this is that funders are humans, right? We're all humans in this, trying to engage in this, right? And so there's been this perception that the funder, that, you know, is this like this mythical like giant that we can't even relate to. But, you know, frankly, the way I view it and when I teach, I always say, you know, you as an organization are actually helping the funder to meet their mission. Right. So it is actually a mutually beneficial relationship if we think about it that way. It's also important, like you said, to have alignment, because not every organization or every funder is going to be as responsive to, you know, to innovating as you are. Right. So it's also, that's where that alignment piece is very, very critical. There's a question that came up from the audience, and people are saying hi to you. I hope you have an opportunity to chat. A lot of your grantee partners, Lisa, are in the chat. And I think Kenya is blowing up for you for Tatu. They're very excited. But one of the questions came from Nigeria, from Simi Nwagugu, who's going to be speaking in the corporate event next week. And what she said was, she's a CEO of Junior Achievement Africa. Her question was, you know, there's a seeming bias towards East Africa when it comes to the priorities that funders have. Is that the case, or is it just a perception, or what do you think might be driving that? Lisa, maybe we'll start with you, because you have the perspective of the different funders in your network.
Yeah, so Liz, I think there's some of the obvious things. I think for many funders, they go to areas, and this is both a positive and a negative. We started off this conversation about how many of the people in our network come to us through people we know, which is great and lovely. But what does tend to happen based on this is we all fund in the same regions. Some of us fund the same organizations. And whilst I do think that there's certain advantages to that, there are certain disadvantages. There are regions or organizations that get overlooked. I do think we haven't named this yet. It's been a subtext of this entire conversation, the power dynamics between funders and organizations. I am very aware all of the time that Tatu and those other organizations with whom we work in East Africa talk to me in my language. Our applications and our material and our websites are not in the languages of people. So it's I happen to be very bad at speaking different languages, but the assumption is that I can fund only if you can speak. I can fund you only if you can speak English. Yeah, I think there are a whole bunch of reasons why that exists.
Okay. All right. Okay. Wonderful. Thank you for sharing that. And I want to go ahead and ask this question about, you know, so you're part of a network. We've talked about relationships. We've talked about, you know, the importance of connecting folks to your network. What I'd like to find out is, you know, what are the different ways that you are able to sort of, you know, we look at developing a long-term relationship with a funder. What are the different ways that a funder can connect or support an organization, right? Because, you know, once you get the grant, that's the beginning of it, but you can go much further than that. Like you said, introducing to your networks, but there's a lot more to it, to that relationship, depending on the organization. Can you speak a little bit to that, Tatu, in terms of what you've experienced with your different funding partners? And then Lisa, if you can share from your perspective with IFF, as well as with the Tri-State Area Africa Funders Network.
Sure. So the first thing I would say is, you know, for existing relationships is understanding the scope of funding partners. has been really important for us. Some funding partners are very clear that they're here to support you not only financially, but with technical assistance as well. And what we do is we map those out and we keep tabs of any changing strategies or focus areas of our funders. And when we come to a critical area of need, and for organizations, it's usually, especially for early start organizations, it's your capacity, your human resource needing to hire people to do the work that you're trying to grow. And when it comes to areas like that, then we have partners who will reach out to and say, there's a critical need developing. And because we're very data driven, we can give the data to say how this came up to show that we needed to increase capacity. And then we present a question to our partners to say, what would you suggest we do to think around this? Because our budgets at the moment can't really fit this need. And listen to what the suggestions are. Again, funders understand their ecosystem more than I would ever would, just the same way that I understand my beneficiaries and stakeholders more than my funding partners ever would. And I think relying on that expertise has really helped us gain the support that we need. Yeah, I'll just say that for now.
Thank you. I'd be happy to jump in. And just before I answer this question, Liz, there was something you said earlier and it's been sitting with me and I would like to emphasize it. You mentioned something about as a foundation, as funders, we couldn't do our work without our implementing partners. I would like to emphasize that. I think as a small family foundation, I'm very aware that the funds in our foundation exist in the public good space. And it is my responsibility as an executive director of that foundation to ensure that the funding resources are dispersed in that way. I think in order for us to have any impact as a foundation, we could not do that without Buildher, without the Tatus of the world, without organizations who implement and do the work for us and have the impact and thus allow us to fulfill our mission. I couldn't exist without the partners in our portfolio. I do think that once again, and it seems to be a theme today, we talk about communication. It's really important to understand for the organization to understand the funder and the funder to understand the organization, and expectations to be laid out as clearly and articulately as possible in advance. So there are some funders who upfront would commit to a 2 or 3 or 5 year revenue funding arrangement or partnership. I think if one's able to ascertain those things in advance, it's really helpful. Everybody needs funding. We know that everybody needs money. But I do think Tatu spoke to some of the other ways that funders or family foundations or individuals can support this work. I do think there's a need for technical assistance. Some of the partners we know in our Tri-State Area Africa Funders Network provide funding. Some provide the technical assistance themselves. Some provide funding to organizations to go and source the technical assistance that they want or believe they need. I think that some funders provide funding for or access to convenings, to conferences, to learning opportunities, to forums or platforms where organizations can collaborate with each other and learn from and with each other. I think that was one of my big learnings early in the space. Is I have the privilege as a funder, as I said, in the times when we were doing site visits, of visiting a whole lot of organizations. And it struck me one day early on in our journey that because this work is so hard and because many organizations are under-resourced, the leaders don't have time to go visiting all their peers and their friends in the neighborhood and learning from them. And so I think that's another thing that funders can do, providing those kind of resources to enable leaders to learn from. Who better to learn from than your peers who are working in the field. And then if you'll allow me one more, one of my big passions is board and governance.
Yes.
There are some funders in our network who believe in helping to strengthen the governance aspects of organizations. Some of them speaking to organizations about potential board seats or board roles. And I do think that for me is another way that funders can be instrumental in helping to support the organizations in their portfolio.
Okay. No, that's wonderful. So it's just I want to just address something I've been reading or trying to read through the comments, and folks are asking, okay, what you talked about early stage organizations you invest in. What type of organizations do you invest in? The first thing I want to tell everybody is you can actually go to issroff.org if you want to learn about what they do. But on the landing page for the African Resource Mobilization Series, and I believe the link was dropped in, if you go to the partners section of that page, we have hyperlinks to each one of the partners sites, so you can learn a little bit more. Another thing I want to also share with you is that if you're in East Africa, and Simi, I know you're going to say it was just East Africa based, but in East Africa, Candid, one of our partners, has released a database of almost 90 local funders and some of the US funders that's free, that's available. So I think it's going to be dropped into the chat as well. So you can research that. And so what's really important is if you don't happen to be in a situation where you have an access to a network, please go ahead and take a look there, because it shows you which organizations are funding. It shows you which funders are funding. It shows you which organizations they have funded, the grant amount, the description of the grant. And that's a really good indicator of whether or not you fit in their strategy. So just do the homework. Even though like I said, it's hard for you to find the data. Some of the data is out there, and it tells you everything. And in fact, if you go to a place like Grants, I think it's GrantSpace, Lisa, we would be able to find out who you fund, because you have to file a tax return, and in that tax return it shows who you funded. So it's just a matter of doing a little bit of research to find out a little bit about what's important to you. But you also mentioned on your website.
Liz, can I jump in here also?
Please go ahead.
A strategy that I have found useful, and sometimes we do this for our partner organizations, they could do it for themselves too, is finding out the similar organizations in your space and looking through their list of funders. And certainly Candid has made this very easy for some people by sort of having all the lists in one place, but that's also a good place to start. Who are the other funders? Looking up on LinkedIn or some of those platforms. Who do you know at those foundations or those, and who can make a connection for you or make an introduction?
Thank you, for saying LinkedIn, Lisa. Because we always talk about LinkedIn. LinkedIn is a perfect place to start. So you go to the website or you go wherever it is to find out about a foundation. Then you end up on LinkedIn, and you can see the people who work for that foundation and identify who you have in common. And then you can actually ask, for an introduction or some additional information that gives you better context when you make that connection. So that's a really good point. Thank you for sharing that. All right, so let me just they're going to be sending me some of the questions in the chat, because the chat is just like it keeps moving. But let me continue with one more, and then we'll go back. We'll just finally go into we'll go right into the rest of the discussion. Actually, no, let's just go ahead and let's just go in. Let's see. So we're hearing from some of our partners. So we have a lot of folks from Kenya Association of Fundraising Professionals. So we've got Joseph Wangendo, we've got Anne Mutuka, we've got Mike Naholi, and let's see questions that are getting here. How can we communicate our hearts in the most discreet way? Communication is always affected by cultural differences. Then this comes from Beatrice Otto. And I think what it is that Beatrice is trying to say that she'd like to be able to communicate in a way that's really authentic and that's emotive, but then she doesn't understand what's appropriate given that there's such a cultural difference between those in the US and say I think that she's probably in East Africa somewhere. Otto.
Can I take that one?
Sure, please go ahead.
What I found, I found that there are stages of communication that can help you in bringing out authenticity. And I feel like an intro email, for instance, will be a bit more formal, sharing key information that I have developed based on my research and what the focus of the funder is. But for instance, if the funder invites me for an introductory call where we can actually speak and hear each other's voices, that's the stage where I allow my passion and authenticity to come through. And, but also gauging if that's being received by the funder as well, and if that's aligned with what they're looking for. But I feel like I can't always bring out the passion of my team and my passion, and anybody who knows me knows how passion driven I am. I can't bring it out in every stage of the process, but whenever I'm having a call and speaking more towards my reasons for founding Buildher, or speaking towards the nature of our work, passion has a place there. But in my intro call, not really. And in my reporting, I can allow it to come out through different stages, like personal stories from the women themselves. Because sometimes it's actually helpful to have your beneficiaries bring out the passion, because their experience of your organization and your work can highlight much better what you're doing for the community than you ever could. So there's a place for passion, but it's not every stage, I think.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Lisa, do you want to chime in?
So same theme again here, over and over. Know your funder. So Tatu and I connected very early on in our relationship over our passion for women and girls, and providing them with a combination of, and I'm using inverted commas here, hard skills and soft skills in order to empower them to take control over their lives. And that's really one of the things that attracted me to Tatu early on. I believe, just speaking on behalf of the funders in our tri-state network, funders are also passionate. we also do this work because we really care about some of these issues. And so certainly know your funder and know the language they use, but that is an early point of connection for me, at least.
Okay. Can I add something, Liz?
Sure, please go ahead. Yes, please.
Because I think Lisa is a very good example in our relationship. When I met Lisa, and she gave me an invitation to share more passion by communicating to me what mattered to her in her foundation, what mattered to her in her work. And so I took that cue, and then I could add a little more and open up a little bit more and be more vulnerable with her, because I noticed her communication was inviting me to do so. And I think noticing those cues, because some funders are not going to get into the depth that Lisa will get in with me. And I appreciate that, because it can't be with everybody. But I think taking the cue as well from your funder, they tell you and they can communicate what they want to hear from you, and following that up is important.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I agree with you on that. Okay, so Lisa, this is a question for you that I'm going to pull up from the audience. Okay, wait, just give me a second. So Thomas Fry says, okay, Thomas Fry wants to know, okay, for funders, how is it that funders need to operate differently to advance social change? For instance, unrestricted giving, providing multi-year funding. I guess what he's trying to say is that, obviously right now within the environment that we're currently experiencing, the times we're experiencing, the old model doesn't necessarily apply in some instances. So how can funders become, are funders becoming much more flexible, and then sort of kind of helping with unrestricted funds to help organizations through this sort of really difficult period?
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Tom, for that question. I just like none of you who lead organizations can tell other organizations how to do their work. I don't feel empowered to tell my funder colleagues how to do their work, but I certainly feel that as funders, we have we need to hold other funders accountable to their values, to what they say they do. If they say they're going to do this, it's very hard for organizations to hold them accountable for doing that. It's much easier for us as other funders to hold funders accountable for it. I'm a firm believer in particularly for early stage organizations, unrestricted giving. The leader of the organization knows where they need the funds. If I trust him or her enough to disperse funding to them, I have to trust that they know where that funding needs to go. So those things I think are all very valid. For me, a lot of that was as valid pre-COVID as it is now, maybe a little bit exacerbated. But I do think this question, if you'll give me a moment, Liz, gives me an opportunity to speak about what I think is critical and vital now. I think being a funder living and working in New York, as we are now in the beginning of 2021, if we are not thinking about and very focused on issues of power dynamics in the relationships we have with the organizations we support or fund or have relationships with in our portfolio, I would really question why. This is with the COVID crisis, with the social justice movement in the US, with issues around racism and power and status quo and all kinds of things, I believe that as funders, now is the time when we have to start asking ourselves and each other some of these very, very hard questions about what it is in our strategies and the way that we operate is perpetuating power dynamics versus what is very intentionally trying to dismantle some of the traditional power dynamics that in my mind will have no place in the world going forward.
Yeah, in the world, absolutely. Like, I mean, the social justice movements you refer to are really worldwide, right? And so those issues apply as well. So a question that again comes up is with respect to give me 1 second, let me just pull it up. Sorry. Consistent thread, open connection to funders. Okay, is with respect to where can people, like, if let's say if I have an organization and I don't have a presence in the US, right? I don't have an organization. How is it that we would be able to even interact? Like, if let's say we met and you said, we really like the work that you're doing, and we'd love to be able to support you. How does one go about that? Because, the reality is that a significant portion of funds coming from the US to African organizations have to go through an intermediary of some sort. So can you share a little bit about that, Lisa?
I'm not sure I'm best positioned to do this. Maybe we should leave this to the King Budwein
No, well, you can speak for that, and then I can share a little, because I write about this. But it is a question that came from Mike Machilwa, one of our partners.
Right. So certainly happy to work with organizations who, many of the organizations we work with when we first meet each other do not have a presence in the US, and quite frankly, even towards the end of longer term relationships don't have a presence in the US. So there are intermediaries, we've spoken about this a lot on this call, there are ways of supporting organizations other than direct funding. And so I would think about some of those things for organizations who do not have a US presence.
No, that's great. And Tatu, how about for you? How have you gotten around that?
Well, we work with Budwein as well. So
that's right.
Yes. But I will say how we got there, though, because that's
okay. I love that. Those are the nuggets, yes. Right? Let's get there.
So we had a lot of funders say to us, "We'd love to work with you. Do you, how do we work with you from here? Considering that we need that intermediary." And we actually just wrote to our funders with a question and said, this is what we're struggling with. We had done our homework. We understood how much it would be for us to register in the US. We didn't feel that at that point of our development, we were able to put resources aside for that. And we communicated all this, like the legal fees would be this much, the registration would be this much, the process would need support. So we are asking, is there any way that you would suggest we go around this? Or do you feel that this is the only approach? And we had a number of people write to us and say, have you considered an intermediary and have you looked at King Budwein? So that's actually how we got into this conversation. And then we asked for an introduction from one of our funders.
An introduction, so again, you use the network.
Yes, yeah. Once again, it's funding networks that have really got us this far.
Okay. Yeah, no, that's wonderful. And folks want to learn more about those services, they can go through the landing page to learn more. But that's right, that is one of your partners. Okay, so we're coming to, we have about 3 more minutes. And so I just want to ask you to just sort of leave us with some real nuggets that, if anyone, when people leave today, and I think people are really, really excited because the numbers have been really steady in terms of who's been with us, but what can we leave folks with as they really try to navigate through this period of time? Because it's hard, right? I mean, there's some estimates that, upwards of 50% of organizations will go away during this period of time. And which means that we really need to have access to the right resources. We need to have access to the right strategies to be able to help us move forward. Can you share some nuggets around that?
Tatu, should I jump in?
You could jump in, I'll follow.
So nothing new, just going to summarize some of the points that I made before, Liz. This work is hard. For those organizational leaders out there, my assumption is that you overworked, but fundraising and marketing will continue to be a major part of your role going forward as long as you're in that role. So it's worth taking the time and effort to put some thought and strategy into how to make that most efficient and effective as possible. There is a group that we use that I'm really a huge fan of that does fundraising strategy, a group called For Impact. And their overarching motto is impact drives income, not the other way around. So you can't keep going to funders and saying, okay, well, when you give us more money, we'll be able to do something. You actually have to start doing it. And I know that's very difficult without any funding, but you actually have to just start working and don't let the lack of resources prevent you from going ahead. I think points speaking to funders on the call, I do think I'm back on my mission of we have to hold each other accountable. We can't keep doing the same things as we've always been doing and expect different results. So particularly this is the moment to rethink the way that we relate to each other, to the sector, and particularly to our partners, who are the ones who enable us to complete our mission and have our impact. And just a couple of things that I would like to say specifically about Tatu, and I am sure some of the other organizations, organization leaders who are on the call, when you approach funders, there are lots of different asks. Everybody needs funding. Buildher needs funding. So those funders on the call, if you haven't looked at Buildher, please do. But people need
Definitely.
other things as well. They need networks, they need introductions, they need relationships. Some people need technical assistance. Just ask. Just have you've got to give someone the opportunity to say yes or say no. Don't decide for a funder that they're not going to like you and they're not going to fund you.
Right, you don't know.
And then my final plug, because this is something I'm really excited about, but in the US at the moment it's a little bit difficult. Buildher has a new furniture products line. For those of you who are in East Africa, please check it out. I
want to check it out.
That I could get to some of that furniture, so just something else too.
Yay. Okay, yeah, definitely. I'm all about that, Tatu. Thank you, Lisa. And Tatu, what would you like to leave us with?
The first thing I would say is something we learned over COVID is that crisis is a ground zero for opportunity. And so, as Lisa mentioned, we actually launched our product line in a moment where most people would have said, is this really the right time? And we were doing this in response to what our ecosystem was telling us. People were asking us if we could sell our furniture, and the women were coming up with such brilliant ideas for furniture. And I think using crisis as a time to, one, pivot, question, explore, and communicate that exploration and that pivoting to your partners is really important. I think another thing for me is reaching out to the funders who are more personally connected to you. Like for me, that's Lisa for sure, but I have a few other funders who I can reach out to say, I'm panicking, this isn't working, what do you suggest I do? And actually, I've had people I reached out to say, oh, well, I actually know these 5 people who you could talk to, and they might be able to help you in this and this and this way. And I found as a co-founder and a leader, you're often so overwhelmed in a moment of crisis. But if you keep saying, how can I use this to create more opportunities, open up into more conversations with your funders, open up to more conversations with your networks, then that seems to be very helpful. And then the last thing I would say is, as organizations, our burden is really to demonstrate our value, and we cannot forget that. I love what Lisa raised about the For Impact organization and how they empower people like me to think differently about what you do. And in fact, what we say within Buildher is that we are in the business of impact. That's actually a phrase we use. And so we have to communicate everything that we're learning, whether it's a failure, whether it's a success, whether it's a metric that we didn't even know we should be measuring. We do it on our social media, we do it in our reports, and that has really kept our funders in turning almost all our relationships into long-term relationships, because we're continuously demonstrating value. And this is something I see I have to continue doing with Buildher in order to open up new networks to support our work.
Fantastic. And I love the fact that you pivoted. First of all, I'm obsessed. I'm going to have to find that furniture. But what's really great is that is really important information for a funder to know, one, that you're taking an opportunity to pivot right now and you're creating a new product line, which you're selling, which is actually adding to the sustainability of your organization. So if I were a funder and I evaluated you, I would say, wow, this is actually a CEO that I want to bank on, because you're definitely smart about diversifying your revenue sources, and that's really, really key. So I've just been given the cue that we need to go ahead and wrap up, because we're at 9 o'clock. And this was such a fantastic discussion. I enjoyed it, tremendously, and I hope you did as well. And that you apply at least one nugget that you received today to connect with and engage your prospective funders. I also encourage all of you to use LinkedIn. You've met all these people who've been sharing in the Q&A. You've met all of us. Connect with us on LinkedIn. This is what it's about, is really developing your network as a result of participating in different initiatives. And I want to thank Lisa and Tatu, for just a wonderful discussion. And once again, I thank King Budwein Foundation US and our partners for bringing all of us together. Hafiza, I'll now hand it back to you to share your final thoughts.
Thank you again. I hope this conversation was not only interesting, but most importantly, useful to your organizations. There are several other webinars in the African Resource Mobilization webinar series. The next conversation will take place on March 10th on finding alignment, how to attract and engage U.S. corporate partners. You will be emailed a link to register along with the web link for the full schedule. And following this conversation, please complete our survey that will be sent to you. It takes fewer than 30 seconds to complete, and it really helps us provide useful content to you in the future. Thank you again for joining KBF US, and a special thank you to our partner, Kenyan Association of Fundraising Professionals.
Thank you.
Thanks.